Let's have an honest conversation about testing and optimization in digital paid media campaigns. If you're a marketer, whether you're on the agency side, part of an in-house team, or even a business owner who manages your own ads, you've almost certainly encountered the challenges of trying to gather insights from, a test that was simply too short of a time frame or too underfunded to provide any real reliable data. And yet, this scenario happens over and over. A brand dips a toe into paid social or search ads for a week or two with a small budget, sees minimal results, either positive or negative, and then makes sweeping decisions about the future of that entire channel or approach. Or they attempt to run an A/B test for only a few days, draw grand conclusions, and then wonder why performance drastically changes a week later when the test is over. So let's dissect why this happens so often, why it can be so misleading, and more importantly, how a more robust approach to testing and optimization actually works. There's a strong temptation in today's fast-paced marketing environment to want immediate answers. Everybody, from executives to clients to your own internal team is asking, so how's this campaign performing, right? Right after it launches is usually when that question comes in. But jumping to conclusions after a tiny sample period can seriously lead you astray and cost you more money, time, and energy in the long run. It might even lead you to abandon a channel or strategy that could have been highly profitable if you only had given it a fair chance to show its true colors. So why are short and limited budget tests particularly problematic? Well, let's talk about the role of randomness, sample size, seasonality, buyer psychology, creative fatigue, and all the other factors that can distort your perception of a campaign if you only look at a minuscule slice of data. First, let's talk about randomness and sample size. If you've ever taken a basic statistics class or even just played around with coin flips, you know that a small sample can swing wildly by chance. In marketing, that means that if you only spend, say, $100 or $200 and maybe you get 3 conversions, your cost per conversion might look spectacular or abysmal based on purely a random fluctuation. One extra purchase or lack thereof in such a small sample can drastically change your metrics, leading you to think, wow, this is 3 times better than my other channel. Or, on the other hand, this campaign is tanking, we better shut it down. And then a week later, if you kept it running, you might have seen a drastically different result once more data rolled in. Here's a typical example. An advertiser decides to test a new product line on Facebook ads. They allocate a total of $300, split it across 3 ad sets, each targeting a different audience. And within a couple days, maybe they see ad set A gets a single sale, ad set B gets 0 sales, and ad set C gets 2 sales, leading them to conclude that ad set C is the winner. So, then they might kill the other 2. But that might be a total of 3 conversions across $300 of spend. Far too few to be statistically significant. Maybe if you let it run for a couple more weeks, you'd find that ad set A catches up and surpasses ad set C because of the initial random distribution of audiences. Or maybe none of them is truly great, but one is at least consistent enough to break even, to be a break-even scenario once it's fully optimized. The point is, you can't know from just a handful of data points. Second, consider seasonality and buying cycles. Many products or services have natural ebbs and flows in demand. So for instance, if you're marketing a product that sells particularly well at the beginning of the month, when people get paychecks, for instance, or perhaps in the 3rd and 4th quarters of the year, a quick test in an off period might show little traction. If you extrapolate from that small test, you might say this channel never worked for us. But maybe if you'd run it during your typical strong sales window, you'd have seen a very different result in performance. Similarly, in B2B context, certain industries see big purchasing pushes at the end of a quarter or at the end of the fiscal year, or in synergy with specific trade shows or annual budgeting cycles. So a short test, will miss these windows and won't capture the full reality. Additionally, buyer psychology can't be rushed. If you sell a high-ticket item or a service that requires research and comparison, you might not see conversions within a mere week. People click your ad, they read, they bookmark your site, they talk to colleagues. By the time they circle back 2 weeks later to fill out your lead form or place an order, you may have already ended your test, concluding that the campaign didn't work. This is especially critical for B2B leads where the sales cycle could be weeks or even months long. If you only measure immediate conversions from, day 1 to day 5, you miss that entire pipeline dynamic. Another often overlooked factor is creative fatigue. Suppose you run your ad for a few days. Everything looks good and you assume you found your magic bullet. But after another week, performance might drop because the same audience is seeing the same creative too many times. If your short test ends right before that drop-off, you'll be blissfully unaware that a few days of good performance might not be sustainable. Conversely, you might see your best performance in the second or third week after your ad is, seasoned, and you might never know if you ended your test too soon. All of this points to the idea that short tests rarely provide enough data or time to see these natural patterns unfold. So how should you approach testing in a more effective way? Let's dig into some deeper strategies. One approach is to allocate enough budget and time to reach a meaningful number of conversions. This concept is sometimes referred to as confidence level or statistical significance. While you don't have to be a hardcore statistician, it's good to have a sense of roughly how many conversions you need before you can make a reliable call. If your cost per conversion target is $50, for instance, and you only spend $200, you might just see 4 conversions. That's likely too few to draw strong conclusions. If you spend $2,000 and see 40 conversions, you can be far more confident in the pattern you're seeing. Likewise, extending your test for multiple weeks or even an entire month can help you capture the variability across weekdays, weekends, pay cycles, or other time-based factors. For e-commerce brands, for instance, Fridays and weekends might see more impulse buys, while for B2B, Monday through Thursday might be best. If you only test from Monday to Wednesday for a single week, you could be missing out on, weekend shoppers or skipping the days when your B2B audience typically does research. Another principle is to do phase testing. For instance, you can start with a moderate daily budget over 2 weeks to identify which creative or audience is performing better. Then in the next phase, you might scale the budget for the top performer and run for another 2 weeks to confirm that the results hold at a higher spend level. If performance remains consistent as you increase your budget, you likely have a winner. If it collapses, you know that you might have found an early fluke that doesn't scale. Now let's talk about the difference between single variable A/B testing and more complex multivariate tests. A short limited test might tempt you to throw everything in at once. Multiple creatives, multiple audiences, multiple placements, and see what floats to the top, right? But that approach can muddy the waters if you don't have the budget or time to isolate each variable. Instead, you might decide to only test, the creative variations first, holding the audience and placement steady. Or do the opposite, test different audiences with the same creative. Once you find a winner in one dimension or variable, you fix that and test the next dimension. This slower, more methodical approach yields far more reliable insights because you're not overwhelming your limited tests with too many changes or variables at once. There's also the question of how to handle bad initial results in a longer test. Sometimes advertisers see 0 conversions in the first few days and panic. They kill the campaign prematurely. But, occasionally the algorithm, in the case of Facebook or Google, is still learning how to find your best audience, or maybe your audience simply isn't impulsive, particularly in B2B. A wise approach is to define a threshold or a time window ahead of time. We're gonna let this run for at least 2 weeks or until we spend X amount, whichever comes first, before we can make any final calls. That can stop you from these knee-jerk reactions on day 3, for instance. Now, we also have to address the reality that budgets aren't infinite. Not every advertiser can afford to spend thousands of dollars per test, but consider the cost of making a bad decision based on incomplete data. If you cut off a potentially profitable channel because your small test looked bad, you could lose out on thousands more in future revenue. Conversely, if you scale up a campaign that only looked good by random chance, you could burn money on a false winner. So, the question becomes, can you afford not to test thoroughly? Usually the answer is that the bigger risk is to rely on tiny, underfunded tests that might lead you astray. In some cases, you can do a phased approach, meaning you start with a minimal daily spend, but still plan to run for a longer period until you accumulate enough conversions. For example, If your daily budget is $50, you might plan to run 30 days or gather $1,500 worth of data. That might yield enough conversions to see a pattern. Sure, it's slower than spending $1,500 in a single week, but if that's the only way to accumulate a robust data set, it's better than running a quick, abrupt test that ends too soon. Another more advanced approach involves day parting or scheduling. Sometimes you test at different times of the day or different days of the week if you suspect your audience is more active at certain times. In a short test, you might never see how your ads perform on weekends, or maybe you happen to test it over a holiday period and skew the data completely. A longer test spanning multiple weeks, definitely helps smooth out these anomalies. So let's go even deeper and talk about outlier events that can completely throw off your short tests. Imagine you're running a test for a week and by coincidence, one influencer or blogger shares your product organically, driving a sudden wave of conversions that your analytics might attribute to your paid ads because, the user path included an ad click at some point. If that wave artificially boosts your conversions, you might think, wow, this ad is unstoppable, but in reality, you've got a lucky break from an external factor that won't repeat next week. Alternatively, you might have a site outage or a shipping delay or something like that that hampers conversions in that single test period. And if you call it quits, you never see how your ads would have performed under normal circumstances. Seasonality, as mentioned earlier, can be a killer. If your brand sells more in Q4, like many do around the holiday season, then a test in Q1 might look terrible by comparison. Or if you test during a major competitor's sale event, your ads might get overshadowed, leading you to think that your channel's worthless or that particular ad or creative is not doing so good. That's why so many big companies plan tests around their typical business cycles, ensuring that they gather data in a period that's representative of the environment that they expect to operate in. If you have the resources, you might even run, smaller tests in each quarter to see how performance changes with the seasons, building a more holistic understanding. Another angle is the funnel approach. E-commerce advertisers often track direct sales from an ad to measure success. But in B2B or higher consideration purchases, your conversion might just be a sign up or an email submission or a white paper download. If you look at only, that top of funnel conversion and stop your tests after a few days, you might not see whether these leads eventually become marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, or paying customers. So a short test might tell you we got X number of leads, but you have no idea if they're leads that matter. A longer test that follows those leads through the pipeline can reveal whether that campaign truly yields real ROI or just vanity signups. We should also consider the psychological aspect. Sometimes stakeholders or your boss might want immediate answers. They might ask, what's our cost per acquisition on day 2 or 3 of the campaign? And you might feel pressure to give a definitive answer and optimize right away. This is where it helps to set expectations. You can explain that the campaign is in the learning phase, a term you often hear with Facebook ads, Google ads and other platforms that need time to optimize. You can let them know that it might take a week or two to for these algorithms to figure out the best audience and placements, especially if you started a brand new campaign with fresh creatives. In that sense, part of your job is stakeholder management. You have to communicate that real data-driven insights require a stable window of observation. Now, let's talk about proven techniques for better testing. One is the concept of batch testing. That's when you create, for example, 3 or 4 variations of an ad or audience segment, and then you rotate them equally over, 2 to 4 week window, ensuring that each variant gets equal share of impressions and budget. You monitor performance, but hold your nerve without cutting anything too soon. Only after you reach a predetermined threshold, for instance, 50 conversions, total, or a certain amount of ad spend, do you evaluate which variant, or variation is leading. Then you might pause the losers and maybe spin up new variations based on the winner. This systematic approach is more reliable than just turning off an ad that, lost in the first 2 days. Another technique is, multi-phased scaling. Suppose you find an ad that, an ad set that does well in your initial test. Instead of immediately throwing, $10,000, behind it, you scale gradually, maybe doubling the budget from $50 a day to $100 a day for a week, then to $200 a day, and so on. Each step you watch if the performance holds up. Sometimes a campaign is only profitable at lower budgets because of a smaller subset of your audience that's easy to convert. As soon as you try to reach a broader audience and increase that budget, the performance drops. A short test might never reveal this if you only test it at one budget level. There's also the matter of creative lifespan. Some ads do extremely well at first because they're new and fresh, but a couple of weeks in or a month or two in, frequency rises and your cost per conversion starts to climb. A short test might end before that happens, leading you to believe that the ad is golden. Then you scale or keep it running and watch it slowly degrade. A more robust test that actually runs long enough to see if that degradation happens can save you from overcommitting, to an ad that's destined to burn out quickly. One cannot underestimate the value of rotating different ad formats too. Maybe in your short test, you only used a single static image ad. That might not represent how a carousel or video ad would perform. If you jump to the conclusion that this channel doesn't work, you could be missing out on the possibility that a different ad format is more compelling for your audience. That's where multi-creative or multi-format testing over a longer period of time can really shine. Now let's address something that often confuses marketers, the algorithms themselves. Facebook or Google ads often talk about a learning phase where they encourage you to not make any changes too frequently right? Each time you change your budget significantly or swap out an ad, you reset that, learning phase. The platform's algorithm tries to find the best users for your campaign, adjusting bids and placements and such accordingly. If you end that test prematurely, you might be judging performance while the algorithm hasn't even, settled into a stable optimization state. And that can totally distort your metrics. One particularly interesting phenomenon is that some campaigns start out slow in the first few days. Maybe the algorithm is trying, a broad range of placements or audiences. Then it refines to your ideal user over the following week and performance, starts to ramp up. If you panic in those first few days and cut it, you're never going to see that improvement. Conversely, some campaigns start strong because the platform quickly serves your ad to low-hanging fruit. Then you get cheap conversions at first, and then as it tries to expand, performance normalizes. If you ended your test after the first few days, you're going to have an inflated sense of how well it works. Let's also remember the concept of creative synergy across your channels. If you're running a multi-channel test, for instance, say a mix of Facebook, Instagram, Google search, and maybe a display retargeting campaign, one channel might primarily drive awareness while the other channel captures the conversions. So a short test that only looks at direct conversions from the awareness channel might declare it a loser, when in reality, it's fueling your retargeting or brand search. This is especially relevant if you haven't set up a multi-touch attribution model. A longer, bigger test that sees how the entire funnel evolves, might reveal that yes, your top of funnel channel looks unprofitable if measuring that alone, but your retargeting channel sees a huge boost in conversions from that audience. Additionally, some marketers prefer to test, in control versus test scenarios. For instance, you might hold out one region or one audience as a control group, where you don't run new ads, and then compare it to the test group that sees the new ads. This is more advanced, but it can help you isolate the effect of your campaign from other marketing activities or external factors. But guess what? You need a longer test to gather enough data for both groups to ensure it's not, a one-week fluke or influenced by random external events. All of these tactics underscore the same principle. Short, limited budget tests are often insufficient to truly optimize your campaigns. Real optimization is about iterative learning, collecting data over enough time and volume to see real patterns, and then making adjustments based on that. If you rely on a quick burst, you risk throwing away potential gold mines or pouring money into illusions. One final angle, the psychological and organizational willingness to test thoroughly. Sometimes you have clients, bosses, or teams that want quick answers. They might say, we'll only give you $200 for a test and we need results in 3 days because we have a big pitch meeting next week. That environment can push you into an unproductive cycle of short tests that yield minimal insights. The better approach is to align expectations. We need to run this test for 2 weeks at a moderate daily budget to see if this channel can bring realistic, results. We're going to collect data on cost per conversion, watch how it trends daily, and only after we have enough data, then will we pivot and scale up. That conversation might not be comfortable if people are impatient, but it sets the stage for real data-driven decision making. So in summary, while the allure of a quick test is strong, it's cheaper, it's faster, and you can check, test complete off your list. It often does more harm than good. You can be misled by random fluctuations, seasonal dips or spikes, or even momentary creative fatigue or honeymoon periods. The solution is to treat your testing and your optimization as an ongoing process, not a one-off event. Plan for a test window that's at least a couple of weeks. Allocate enough budget to gather a statistically meaningful sample of conversions and be prepared to iterate and refine. Watch for patterns like daily or weekly cycles. Keep an eye on how your cost per conversion evolves over time, and don't get spooked by short-term fluctuations. When you do all of this, you're going to find that your campaign decisions become more stable, more accurate. You'll have the confidence to scale winners, knowing that they're not just a random blip, and you'll retire losers that truly aren't delivering, rather than potentially missing out on good opportunities. And in the long run, that strategic, data-driven approach can elevate your paid media efforts far beyond the realm of guesswork and quick fix solutions. If you've ever run a short test and made a snap judgment only to realize later you missed an entire dimension of performance, take this as a cue to adopt a more robust testing methodology. If you've never tried a multi-week test with a structured approach, consider giving it a shot. You might be surprised at how different the results can look once you have enough volume and time to see the real story here. And of course, keep refining. Even a multi-week test is just the beginning. Optimization has to be continuous. Once you find your best audience, your best creative, and your best messaging, user preferences might change a few months down the line. Or competitors might enter the space, or platform features might shift the equilibrium. A thorough testing culture means you're always gathering data, always checking for changes, and always ready to pivot in a methodical rather than impulsive way. That's the core message here, treating testing as a serious, well-funded, well-timed exercise, not just a half-hearted dip that ends prematurely. The difference in the quality of insights and the reliability of your decisions will be night and day. And ultimately, that means better ROI, more consistent performance, and a deeper understanding of your audience. Everything you want from a digital paid media campaign.